Did you know that Abraham Lincoln pardoned a Christmas turkey? Hi, I'm Erin McCarthy, editor-in-chief of MentalFloss.com. Some credit Lincoln with the first ever presidential Thanksgiving turkey pardon, but that's the wrong holiday. In 1863, the Lincoln family received the bird as a gift meant to be cooked for Christmas dinner. But Tad Lincoln, 10 years old at the time, grew fond of the turkey, which he named Jack. Shortly before Jack was to be killed, Tad learned of the turkey's impending fate. He successfully pleaded for a stay from the turkey executioner and then ran into one of his father's cabinet meetings crying, "He's a good turkey and I don't want him killed." So Lincoln pardoned the bird. And that's the first of many Thanksgiving myths that I'm going to debunk for you today. It's also a misconception that Harry S. Truman started the tradition of pardoning a Thanksgiving turkey. In 1947, he did receive one from the National Turkey Federation, but he most likely ate it. From then on, presidents received turkeys for the holiday. As for who pardoned the first, well, it's complicated. John F. Kennedy didn't eat his, but he didn't call this pardoning, though the press did. Nixon sent at least some of his turkeys to petting farms. Reagan jokingly used the word pardon, and it was President George H.W. Bush who officially said, quote, "Let me assure you and this fine tom turkey that he will not end up on anyone's dinner table, not this guy. He's granted a presidential pardon as of right now." We've all heard relatives blame their post-Thanksgiving dinner sleepiness on tryptophan, but that's not quite fair. It's true that turkey contains the amino acid tryptophan, and it's true that the human body can use tryptophan to make serotonin, which helps us sleep. But turkey contains lots of amino acids that the body works hard to get to the brain for various purposes. There's less tryptophan than those other amino acids. The amount of tryptophan that actually makes it to the brain to create serotonin could best be described as poultry, not sorry. Plus, turkey has less tryptophan than other foods like cheese and nuts. Thanksgiving grogginess is probably just due to overeating and drinking, if that's your thing. Some believe you need to rinse a turkey before cooking it to kill bacteria, but the USDA actually recommends against it. When you wash raw poultry, you risk kitchen contamination. Just cook your bird to 165 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 74 degrees Celsius, to eliminate scary bacteria. That's what the experts have to say, but I have to admit I'm still curious. Whose team rinsed the turkey and whose team no rinse? Let us know in the comments. According to the USDA website, while checking the temperature of a cooking turkey, it's important to monitor, quote, "the innermost part of the thigh and wing and the thickest part of the breast." Which brings me to my next myth. Pop-up thermometers pop when the turkey is cooked. In fact, many of these thermometers are designed to pop up when the turkey has reached around 180 to 185 degrees Fahrenheit. In other words, overcooked. And Consumer Reports tested pop-up timers and found that some popped when the meat was still severely undercooked. Experts recommend you use a regular probe thermometer instead. Turducken is not a new dish, though it was really only popularized around the turn of the 21st century when announcer John Madden was known to rhapsodize about it during Thanksgiving NFL games. There are recipes going back to at least 1774 containing multiple birds within each other. In 1807, a recipe called Roast Without Equal emerged that called for 17 birds. Skylark, thrush, quail, ortolan, lapwing, golden plover, partridge, woodcock, teal, guinea hen, guinea fowl, wild duck, fowl, red pheasant, wild goose, bustard, and fig pecker, which is a real bird and obviously why I insisted on reading this list. The creator of the turducken specifically is up for debate, but many trace its roots to Louisiana or to Louisiana-based chef Paul Prudhomme, who claimed to invent the dish while in a Wyoming lodge. Fun fact, according to Men's Health, a typical turducken contains more than 12,000 calories. A regular turkey clocks in at around 2,400. It's a misconception that stuffing is cooked inside a turkey and dressing is cooked in a dish. While there are some who subscribe to that distinction, geography generally plays a bigger role in deciding which term is used. Dressing is more common in the southern United States, whether cooked inside the bird or not, while stuffing is more common up north. There was a rumor going around in 2016 that canned pumpkin puree was actually a puree of, gasp, squash. But this one is actually kind of complicated. The company Libby's makes about 85% of the pumpkin puree sold worldwide, and they use Dickinson pumpkins in their recipes. And if you want to sell a food and call it pumpkin in the US, the FDA allows food prepared from any of the following to apply: golden-fleshed, sweet squash or mixtures of such squash, and field pumpkin. Field pumpkin is what most of us picture when we think of a pumpkin. It's round and orange and ready to be carved. Dickinson pumpkins aren't so pretty. They're tan with less defined ridges. As for whether they can be considered pumpkins, experts disagree. Some say they're pumpkins, some say they're squash, and some say it doesn't matter because it's all squash anyway. It's a misconception that there was popcorn at the first Thanksgiving. We can trace this myth back to the 1889 novel Standish of Standish by Jane G. Austen, not to be confused with the other Jane Austen. During the 1620s, the type of corn that grew in Plymouth was northern flint corn, which doesn't have the strong kernels that are ideal for popping. And we call it Thanksgiving, but this probably wasn't that. Pilgrims did celebrate Thanksgiving days after fortunate events, but those were usually religious days. They'd go to church and give thanks to God, which is not what the Wampanoag tribe and Pilgrims did during their 1621 celebration, as far as we know. To be clear, what we do know is limited. It mostly comes from one letter written by Edward Winslow. In 1841, his letter was published in Chronicles of the Pilgrim Fathers by Boston writer and publisher Alexander Young. Young called the occasion the first Thanksgiving, even though there's no mention of Thanksgiving in the original text. Even if it had been a Thanksgiving, it wouldn't have been the first one in North America. First of all, many Native American tribes also held ceremonies in which the purpose was to give thanks. And many other European settlers did too. In 1565, a group of Spaniards invited the Timucua tribe to their Thanksgiving in St. Augustine, Florida. In 1598, another group of Spaniards held a Thanksgiving celebration on the Rio Grande. And in 1619, another Thanksgiving took place near Jamestown. So the 1621 festival was not the reverential day or 3 days, some picture. It was more like a harvest festival. About 50 pilgrims and 90 people from the Wampanoag tribe got together and partied. In addition to a lot of eating, they likely had games, races, and mark shooting. The Pilgrims were known to brew beer, so there may have been some imbibing as well. We say that the Pilgrims invited Native Americans to the festival out of gratitude for helping them with the harvest because it makes for a nice story, but there's no way to confirm that it's true. Edward Winslow's letter simply says that there were, quote, many of the Indians coming amongst us, and among the rest their greatest king Massasoit, with some 90 men, whom for 3 days we entertained and feasted. The Pilgrims are famous for their religious lifestyle, but they didn't come to America to escape religious persecution like some claim. In fact, they already did that when they left England and moved to Leiden, Holland during the early 17th century. They then decided to leave Holland where they had religious freedom but were having trouble making ends meet. Some also feared losing their English identity amongst the Dutch. And by the way, Pilgrims didn't wear black and white or buckled hats and shoes at the meal. Black and gray were reserved for Sundays, but considering this Thanksgiving wasn't a religious day, they likely wore their regular clothes, which could be red, green, brown, blue, or a number of other colors. Plain leather was used for shoelaces and belts because it was cheaper and more fashionable than buckles. Speaking of fashion, we have to talk about Black Friday shopping. It's a myth that the day after Thanksgiving is named for being the day that businesses get back in the black after being financially in the red. In fact, the most popular explanation for the name says that police in Philadelphia began calling it Black Friday in the 1950s because many local stores held sales for the crowds in town for the Army-Navy football game. The police hated this chaotic day that involved working overtime. Black Friday was a way of expressing distaste for a day that made things difficult for them. Within about a decade, the whole city was aware of the nickname. It became a well-known term all over the US around the mid to late 1980s. It's a misconception that the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade was always a celebration in honor of Thanksgiving. Originally, it was the Macy's Christmas Parade. And actually, you could say that the first parade in 1924 was really honoring Macy's itself as much as anything else. The parade commemorated the flagship store's expansion into what was then considered the world's largest department store under one roof. It took place on Thanksgiving Day, but it focused on reaching the store's Christmas window display titled The Fairy Folk Frolics of Wondertown. Over the next few years, it would be identified by different names: the Thanksgiving Parade, the Christmas Parade, or even the annual show. But by the 1930s, it was solidly the Thanksgiving Day Parade. Finally, it's not true that Thanksgiving is exclusively an American holiday. There are comparable celebrations around the world. Canadian Thanksgiving is very similar to the American one, but it supposedly traces its history back to explorer Martin Frobisher, who landed in Canada and held a Thanksgiving in 1578. Though we could probably make a list of myths about Canadian Thanksgiving too. As historian Peter Stevens notes, quote, there is no evidence that connects the modern Canadian Thanksgiving to Frobisher's 16th century celebration. And some places celebrate versions of Thanksgiving because of historical connections with America. Grenada, Australia's Norfolk Island, and Leiden, Holland all fit that bill. And there are other holidays which share certain aspects of American Thanksgiving. Germany has Erntedankfest, a similar harvest festival of thanks. And Japan has a holiday which evolved from a harvest festival and now celebrates workers' rights. Its name, Kinro Kansha no Hi, can be translated to Labor Thanksgiving. We pushed back our fossil episode for a very special surprise. You can still drop your favorite fossil facts in the comments for a chance to be featured in that episode. That will go up on December 4th. Make sure to subscribe here so you don't miss it. We'll see you then.